The silence was the first sign. It was a structural flaw in the architecture of his evening, a load-bearing wall that had been removed without warning, leaving the whole of the moment vulnerable to collapse. Liam felt it the instant he turned the key in the lock. The house he shared with Sarah was never silent. There was always music, or the television murmuring, or the sound of her on the phone, her laughter a bright melodic chime that filled the small spaces of their life. Tonight, the silence was a dense, physical presence. It was the sound of a vacuum. He had come from the Grand Atlas Hotel, the scent of its ostentatious lobby, a cloying mix of lilies and ozone, still clinging to his jacket. He was supposed to have met her there for their 8th anniversary. He had arrived early, a rare luxury his job as a construction foreman seldom afforded. He had wanted to see her face when she walked in, to watch her scan the crowd and find him waiting. He had imagined her smile, but he had found her first. She was at the bar, a vision in a sapphire dress he had never seen before. Her back was to the entrance, but he would have known the curve of her neck, the line of her shoulders anywhere. She was not alone. She was leaning toward a man in a suit that cost more than Liam's truck, a man whose hands were smooth and whose smile was an easy, predatory thing. Liam had watched, unseen as she laughed, a sound more brilliant and unrestrained than he had heard from her in years. He watched as she placed her hand on the man's forearm, a gesture of casual intimacy that was like a sledgehammer to his ribs. He saw the flash of a new diamond bracelet on her wrist. A gift, clearly, not from him. He had not confronted her. It was not his way. A builder does not scream at a crack in the foundation. He assesses the damage. He measures the depth of the fissure, tests the integrity of the surrounding material, and calculates the cost of the repair or the necessity of demolition. So Liam had simply turned and walked away, the cacophony of the hotel lobby fading behind him, replaced by the ringing in his own ears. He had driven home on autopilot, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, the familiar texture a grounding force in a world that had suddenly become abstract and treacherous. If stories about resilience, the price of loyalty, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage speak to you, stay with me. Now, standing in the hallway of his unnervingly quiet home, he felt the full weight of the structure's failure. He walked through the living room, his work boots leaving faint, dusty prints on the hardwood floors Sarah was always polishing. The house was too tidy. Her clutter, the magazines, the half-empty mugs of tea, the throw blankets perpetually askew, all of it was gone, an archaeological absence. He moved toward the bedroom, a cold dread coiling in his gut, a slow pour of wet concrete setting into a block of fear. There it was, on the perfectly made bed, centered on his pillow, was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. Beside it, her wedding ring and engagement band sat like two small, cold circles of judgment. He did not have to touch them to feel their chill. He picked up the note. Her handwriting, usually a looping, romantic script, was tight and clinical. Liam, it began, without affection. I can't do this anymore. I need more than this life, more than this house, more than being the wife of a man who comes home covered in dust. I've found someone who understands what I want. His name is Julian. I'm going to be with him. I've taken my things. By the time you read this, we'll be on our way. He read the words again and again, but they would not change. Each syllable was a hammer blow driving a nail of ice into his heart. Dust. She had reduced his life's work, the very substance of his labor that had paid for this house, and the food on their table, to mere dust. He looked at his hands, at the ingrained grime, and the network of pale scars that mapped a decade of hard work. These were the hands that had built things, fixed things, held her. Now they just felt clumsy and dirty. He thought he had reached the nadir, the bedrock of his despair. But then he read the final brutal paragraph. As for Chloe, I can't take her with me. Julian's life isn't set up for a teenager, and frankly, she's your blood, not mine. She's your responsibility now. Don't try to contact me. It's better this way. The paper trembled in his hand. Chloe, Sarah's younger sister. When their parents had died in a car crash 2 years prior, Sarah had insisted they take her in. Chloe was 16 then, a whirlwind of grief and teenage rebellion. She was Sarah's sister, but as the note so coldly pointed out, she was Liam's niece, his late sister's daughter. Sarah had been the bridge, the buffer between his stoic quiet and Chloe's volatile energy. Now that bridge was gone, demolished, and he and the girl were left on opposite sides of a chasm of shared loss and new abandonment, with only the wreckage of a family between them. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the note falling from his fingers. The silence of the house pressed in, no longer just an absence of sound, but the tangible presence of everything he had just lost. He was alone in a house that was no longer a home, with a mountain of debt, a broken heart, and a teenage girl in the next room who had just lost the only other maternal figure she had left. He was a builder, standing in the rubble of his own life, and for the first time, he had no blueprint for what to do next. The first few weeks were a blur of numb autopilot. Liam existed in a grey fog, a miasma of dust and despair. He moved through the motions of his life like a machine whose operator had long since walked away. He woke before dawn, the habit ingrained in his muscles. He made coffee, the acrid smell filling the silent kitchen. He would knock softly on Chloe's door. "Time for school," he would mumble, his voice a rough, unused thing. He would leave toast and a glass of juice on the counter, then retreat to the sanctuary of his truck, the cab a small metal bubble against a world that felt too sharp, too loud, too bright. At work, he was a ghost in a hard hat. The construction site, usually a place of purpose and order for him, became a landscape of meaningless noise and motion. The roar of the excavators, the scream of the saws, the rhythmic thud of the pile driver. It was all just a dull, throbbing headache. He communicated in grunts and hand signals, his mind 1,000 miles away, replaying the image of Sarah's smile at the hotel bar, dissecting every word of her cold, precise note. His crew gave him a wide berth. They saw the hollowness in his eyes, the new, sharp angles of his face as the weight fell off him. They muttered about trouble at home, but no one dared to ask. His boss, Marcus, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and whose hands were as gnarled as old oak, watched him from the site office trailer. Marcus was a relic from a different era, a man who believed sentiment was a waste of good concrete. He did not offer condolences or ask if Liam was okay. He simply walked out onto the site, his boots crunching on the gravel, and handed Liam a new set of blueprints. "North quadrant retaining wall," he'd grunted. "Specs are tight. Don't screw it up." It was Marcus's version of a lifeline, more work, a problem to solve, a wall to build. Liam took the rolled-up papers, his fingers tracing the crisp blue lines. For a few hours the fog would recede as he lost himself in calculations of load-bearing capacity and soil density. But the moment the work was done, the greyness would rush back in, thicker than before. The house was worse. It was a museum of a dead life. Sarah's scent lingered in the closets, a faint ghost of jasmine and vanilla that ambushed him when he reached for a clean shirt. Every object was a landmine of memory. The chipped mug he'd bought her at a street fair, the bookshelf he'd built for her collection of novels, the spot on the sofa where they used to watch movies. He started spending his evenings in the garage, surrounded by the familiar, honest smells of oil and metal, tinkering with an engine that didn't need fixing, just to keep his hands and mind occupied. Chloe was a satellite in a decaying orbit around his own misery. She was quiet, too quiet for a teenager. She kept to her room, the door always closed. He would hear the muffled sounds of music or the clicking of a keyboard. They ate dinner in a strained silence, the clinking of their forks against the plates echoing in the dining room. He would ask about her day, and she would reply with monosyllabic answers. Fine. Okay. Nothing. He knew she was hurting. He knew she felt abandoned, betrayed. He saw the same shadows in her eyes that he saw in his own reflection. But he was so lost in his own labyrinth of pain that he had no idea how to reach her. He was failing her, and that knowledge was another 100-pound bag of cement on his already overloaded shoulders. The house became a hostile territory, each room filled with unspoken grief and resentment. It was no longer a home. It was just a place where two broken people slept. The breaking point, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion. It was a small, mundane failure. It was a Tuesday night, nearly 3 months after Sarah had left. The bills were piled on the counter, a stack of white-windowed envelopes that seemed to mock him with their demands. The mortgage was due, the car insurance, a final, venomous credit card bill under Sarah's name, maxed out on what he could only assume were dresses like the one she'd worn at the hotel. He'd just finished a 14-hour shift, his body a single, unified ache from his boots to the base of his skull. All he wanted was a hot shower and the oblivion of sleep. But Chloe was at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of paper. College application forms, financial aid documents. She was staring at a laptop screen, her expression a mixture of frustration and despair. "It's not working," she said, her voice tight. "The FAFSA website. It keeps crashing. It says our income information is invalid." Liam came to stand behind her, peering at the screen. He saw a jumble of acronyms and error messages. He smelled the faint scent of rain in her hair from her walk home. He saw the tremble in her small hands. In that moment, she looked so much like his sister, it stole his breath. He was supposed to be the adult. He was supposed to fix this. "Let me try," he said, his voice gravelly. He sat down, took the laptop. He navigated back to the start, began re-entering the numbers, his fingers clumsy on the small keyboard. He typed in his income from the previous year. Then he got to the section for the second parent or spouse. He stared at the empty fields. What was he supposed to put? Divorced, separated, abandoned. He didn't even know where she was. He typed in Sarah's name and left the income fields blank. He clicked Submit. Error, incomplete information. Please provide all required financial data. He tried again, this time checking a box for single filer. Error, applicant information does not match existing records. Please contact support. He felt a wave of helpless, incandescent rage wash over him. It wasn't about the website. It was about everything. It was about the smug look on Julian Croft's face. It was about the word dust. It was about the unpaid bills and the silent, lonely house. It was about this brilliant, broken girl whose future was being threatened by a server error and the ghost of a woman who didn't care. It was the final, insignificant straw that broke the camel's back. The laptop slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the table. He pushed his chair back, a harsh, scraping sound on the linoleum. He stood up, intending to walk away, to punch a wall, to do something. But his legs wouldn't hold him. The strength that had carried him through endless shifts, that had hauled steel beams and poured tons of concrete, simply evaporated. He slid down the kitchen cabinets, his back scraping against the wood, and landed on the cool floor with a soft thud. He buried his face in his hands, the rough texture of his palms scraping his skin. A sound tore from his throat, a ragged, dry sob that had been buried under weeks of concrete and steel. It was not loud. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a man who builds things for a living finally, completely, falling apart. He did not know how long he sat there, a heap of broken masculinity on the kitchen floor. It might have been minutes or an hour. Time had lost its linear progression, becoming a thick, soupy medium of shame and despair. The sound of his own ragged breathing was loud in the silence. He felt a small, hesitant touch on his shoulder. He flinched, then looked up through his fingers. Chloe stood over him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear he had put there. She looked like a frightened deer ready to bolt, but she didn't. She knelt beside him, her knees cracking softly. She did not say anything. She did not offer platitudes or try to comfort him. She just put her hand on his back, a light but steady pressure. It was a simple, profound gesture, an anchor. Looking at her, at the fierce, fragile strength in her young face, something inside Liam shifted. The storm of his self-pity began to subside, leaving behind the cold, hard bedrock of reality. This was not just about him, it was about her. His grief was a luxury he could no longer afford. His collapse was a liability she could not bear. He was the only thing standing between her and the abyss. In that moment, looking at the girl who was the last vestige of his own lost sister, a decision formed. It was not a thought so much as a chemical reaction, a spark in the cold engine of his will. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed himself up, his joints protesting. He looked at his hands, turning them over in the dim light of the kitchen. They were tools. They were made to build. He had spent his life erecting structures for other people, following their blueprints, realizing their visions. Now he would draw his own. He would build something for himself, for Chloe, a fortress, a future. He would stop sinking. He would start building. Right now. The first step was an act of sacrifice. The following Saturday, he drove his most prized possession out of the garage. It was a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach-1, a beautiful beast of a car, its raven-black paint gleaming under the weak morning sun. He and his father had spent 5 years restoring it, a painstaking labor of love. It was the last tangible piece of his father he had left. The smell of the leather and gasoline was the smell of his youth, of a simpler, happier time. He drove it to a classic car dealership in the city, his jaw tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He ignored the admiring glances from other drivers. He walked into the dealership and found the owner. "I want to sell it," he said, his voice flat. The owner, a man with a slicked-back ponytail, circled the car like a shark. He whistled. "She's a beauty, fully restored, original engine block?" "Everything is original," Liam said. He felt like he was selling a part of his own soul. They haggled. Liam, for the first time in months, felt a flicker of his old self. He knew the car's worth down to the last bolt. He countered the dealer's lowball offers with cold, hard facts. He was no longer a grieving husband. He was a foreman negotiating a contract. In the end, they settled on a price. It was less than the car was worth, but it was more than enough. The dealer wrote him a check, and Liam handed over the keys without looking back. Driving away in his beat-up work truck, He did not allow himself to feel the loss. It was not a loss. It was an investment. It was the foundation stone. That night, after paying off Sarah's venomous credit card bill and the most pressing of the household debts, he sat at the kitchen table with the remaining money in the college course catalogue from the local community college. He found what he was looking for: night classes, associate's degree in structural engineering with a certificate program in construction management. It was a path, a ladder. Julian Croft, the man who had taken his wife, was a developer. He dealt in money, contracts and visions. He didn't get his hands dirty. Liam realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that to fight a man like that, you couldn't just be the strongest man on the job site. You had to own the job site. His first class was on a Tuesday evening. The classroom was sterile and smelled of whiteboard markers and stale coffee. Liam, in his work clothes, smelling faintly of sawdust and sweat, felt gargantuan and out of place among the fresh-faced kids and middle-aged office workers seeking a career change. He took a seat in the back, his large frame crammed into the small desk. The professor began the lecture, his voice a droning monotone. Liam tried to focus, but his mind, accustomed to the tangible world of steel and concrete, struggled to grasp the abstract equations on the board. He felt a familiar wave of despair. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he was just a man of dust, incapable of more. You're calculating the sheer stress incorrectly. The voice was quiet, crisp, and came from his left. He turned. A young woman was looking at his notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a cascade of unruly black hair was tied back in a messy bun, from which several strands had escaped to frame her face. She pointed a pencil at his scrawled calculations. You're forgetting to account for the torsional moment. It's not just a vertical load. Liam stared at his notes, then at the equation on the board. She was right. He had missed a variable. He felt a flush of embarrassment. Thanks, he mumbled, correcting the formula. You're a builder, aren't you? She asked, not looking at him, her attention already back on the professor. How did you know? She tapped her own notebook. You think in 3 dimensions. You're trying to visualize the beam breaking instead of just trusting the math. I'm Anya, by the way. Liam, he said. They did not speak again for the rest of the class, but as he was packing his bag to leave, she paused by his desk. You have good instincts, she said, her expression serious. But instincts won't get you through this course. You need to learn the language. She held up her textbook, a tome filled with highlighted passages and sticky notes. We could study together. You can help me with the practical application. I can help you with the theory. It was not an offer of friendship. It was a proposal, a transaction. It was a language Liam understood. He looked at her, at the focused intensity in her eyes. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering a partnership. She saw his rough exterior, the calloused hands, the faint scent of the job site, and she wasn't repulsed. She had looked past the dust and seen the foundation beneath. Okay, he said. When and where? It was the second stone in his new foundation. The first had been sacrifice. This one was alliance. The next 5 years were a relentless grind. Time became a blur, measured not in seasons or holidays, but in semesters completed, projects finished, and inches Chloe grew. Liam's life bifurcated into 2 distinct, exhausting halves. By day, he was a man of the physical world. He was on site at dawn, his body a machine of familiar aches and practiced movements. He walked the skeletons of rising buildings, the wind whipping at his jacket, his voice a commanding bark over the din of machinery. He directed cranes lifting multi-ton steel beams into place, his mind a constant whirl of logistics, safety protocols and timelines. The smells of diesel Wet concrete and hot tar were the air he breathed. The texture of rebar, the grit of sand, the cold bite of steel in winter. These were his realities. He poured his frustration and his lingering grief into the work, his physical exhaustion a welcome anesthetic for his emotional pain. But when the sun went down, he underwent a transformation. He would race home, shower the day's grime away, and eat a hasty dinner with Chloe, their conversations slowly evolving from monosyllabic grunts to genuine exchanges about her day at school and his night classes. Then he would enter his second world, the world of paper, theory, and quiet concentration. He would drive to the community college and later the state university he transferred to, his truck's engine a familiar rumble in the night. The libraries and late-night cafes became his new job sites. Anya was his constant companion in this nocturnal world. Their study sessions were intense, focused affairs. They would spread blueprints and textbooks across library tables, the silence broken only by the scratching of their pencils and their hushed, urgent debates. Anya was brilliant, her mind a beautiful, complex cathedral of architectural theory and aesthetic vision. But her designs were sometimes untethered from the grubby reality of gravity and material stress. "This cantilever is beautiful, Anya," Liam would say, his thick finger tracing a dramatic overhang on her sketch. "But it's going to cost a fortune in reinforced steel, and the deflection over time will be a nightmare. If we add a tension rod here, disguised as a design element, we can maintain the line and ensure the structural integrity." She would glare at him, her artistic pride wounded, but then she would study his modification, her sharp mind processing the practical wisdom. A slow nod would follow. "Okay," she'd concede, "that works." In return, she was ruthless with his academic shortcomings. She drilled him on calculus until the abstract formulas began to feel as real as a 2x4 in his hand. She taught him the language of contracts, of zoning ordinances, of project management software. "You can't just build the thing, Liam," she'd insist, pushing a textbook on business law across the table. "You have to know how to bid for it, how to permit it, and how to protect yourself while you do it." They were a strange pair, the rough-hewn builder and the elegant architect. But their minds complemented each other perfectly, two halves of a single, powerful whole. They were building something together night after night over lukewarm coffee and the glow of a laptop screen. They were building his future. His ascent at work was steady, then meteoric. Armed with his new knowledge, Liam started seeing things on the job site that others missed. He saw inefficiencies in scheduling, flaws in engineering specs, better ways to sequence the work. He started speaking up in meetings, not with the bluster of a foreman, but with the quiet, data-backed confidence of an engineer. Marcus, his gruff boss, started listening. He gave Liam more responsibility, moving him from foreman to project supervisor. Liam traded his tool belt for a clipboard, then a tablet. One afternoon, Marcus called him into the dusty, cluttered site trailer. He gestured for Liam to sit, a rare occurrence. He pushed a set of blueprints across the desk. It was for a complex mixed-use development, far larger than anything their small firm, Bedrock Construction, had ever attempted. "The engineers who drew this are idiots," Marcus grunted, tapping a finger on a section detailing the foundation. "They're calling for a deep pile foundation. It's overkill. It'll add 6 months and $2 million to the budget. What do you see?" Liam studied the plans, his mind a whirring calculator of soil reports and load distribution. He remembered a late-night study session with Anya discussing innovative foundation techniques. "We could use a raft foundation," Liam said after a long silence. "If we thicken the slab and use a post-tensioned grid, we can distribute the load more effectively. It's faster, cheaper, and just as strong, if not stronger." Marcus stared at him, his weathered face unreadable. He was silent for a full minute. "Draw it up," he finally said. "Show me the math." Liam worked with Anya for 3 sleepless nights, running simulations, drawing up new specs. He presented the revised plan to Marcus. The old builder went over every number, every line, with a fine-toothed comb. At the end, he leaned back in his creaking chair and just looked at Liam. "I'm getting too old for this," Marcus said, a statement so out of character it shocked Liam. "My body is shot and the business is changing. It's not just about knowing how to pour concrete anymore. It's this." He tapped the revised blueprints. "I'm retiring in a year. I was going to sell the company to one of the big conglomerates, but I'd rather not see my name swallowed up. I'm offering you a partnership. You buy in, we rebrand, we grow. What do you say?" Liam was stunned. It was everything he had been working for, laid out on a cluttered desk in a dusty trailer. He thought of the Mustang he had sold. He thought of the endless nights in the library. He thought of Sarah's dismissive words. Dust. "I say yes," Liam said, his voice steady. They rebranded as Bedrock and Apex Construction. Marcus handled the old-school relationships and site management. Liam, now with his degree in structural engineering and an MBA, he had relentlessly pursued online, became the face of the company's future. He was the one who went to the meetings in sleek downtown offices, his work shirts replaced by tailored suits. He was still a builder, but his tools were now contracts, financial models and strategic vision. His hands, though still strong, were clean. The grit was no longer under his fingernails, it was in his soul. Throughout this transformation, his relationship with Anya deepened. It was a slow, quiet burn, built not on grand romantic gestures, but on shared struggle and mutual respect. It happened in the small moments, the way she would bring him a coffee without asking, when she saw the exhaustion on his face, the way he would instinctively fix a wobbly leg on her drafting table, the way they could communicate a whole paragraph of technical feedback with a single glance across a boardroom. One night, after they had won a major contract, their first skyscraper, they were the last to leave the new, modern office they had designed and built for themselves. They stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. "We did it," Anya said softly, her reflection a pale silhouette against the glittering darkness. "You did it," Liam corrected her. "I'd still be trying to figure out sheer stress without you." She turned to him, her dark eyes soft in the dim light. "You would have figured it out," she said. "It just would have taken you longer. You're the most determined person I've ever met, Liam. You just needed someone to hand you the right set of blueprints." In the quiet of the office, surrounded by the symbols of his new life, he finally allowed himself to feel something other than ambition and resolve. He looked at this brilliant, loyal woman who had seen worth in him when he saw none in himself. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering for a moment on her cheek. It was a gesture more intimate than any he had shared in years. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief second. The space between them, once filled with equations and theories, was now charged with a different kind of energy. It was the silent, powerful pull of two structures that were designed to fit together, to support each other, to create something stronger and more beautiful than either could be alone. The slow burn had finally reached its flashpoint. Chloe, too, had transformed. Under Liam's steady, quiet guardianship, she had flourished. He was not a replacement for her mother or her aunt, but he was a constant. He was bedrock. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, his large, quiet presence, a source of unwavering support on the sidelines. He helped her with her homework, his practical mind finding simple ways to explain complex problems. He taught her how to change a tire, how to check the oil, how to read a contract. He gave her stability, and in that stable ground, she grew roots. She graduated high school as valedictorian and, with Liam's now considerable financial backing, was accepted into a prestigious law school, her focus razor-sharp. She was no longer the troubled, grieving girl he had inherited. She was a formidable young woman, fiercely intelligent and fiercely loyal to the quiet man who had raised her. His family, once a ruin, was now a small, strong structure built to last. News of the outside world, the world Sarah and Julian Croft inhabited, came in trickles like distant seismic readings from a forgotten fault line. Liam never sought it out, but the construction and development world was a small, gossipy one. He heard the whispers at industry mixers and charity galas, events he now attended with Anya on his arm. Julian Croft's meteoric rise had been fueled by reckless debt and shady foreign investments. He was a gambler, not a builder. He built houses of cards on foundations of sand. The first tremors came as rumors of stalled projects and unpaid contractors. Then came the lawsuits, then the inevitable, spectacular collapse. Croft's company imploded, taking with it a string of investors and leaving a trail of half-finished, derelict buildings like concrete skeletons across the city. Julian himself, stripped of his wealth and facing a barrage of fraud charges, vanished. Some said he fled the country, others said he was living in a cheap apartment somewhere, a ghost of his former self. And Sarah, who had attached herself to his star, fell with him. She was left with nothing. The expensive clothes, the lavish parties, the life she had abandoned him for. It had all been an illusion, a temporary facade that had crumbled into dust. Liam felt a strange detachment hearing the news. There was no joy, no schadenfreude. It was like reading an old case study of a failed project. The emotional connection had been severed long ago. His life was here now, with Anya, with Chloe, with the rising skyline of the city that bore the signature of his firm. Sarah was a ghost from a different life, a different man. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, 7 years after she had walked out of his life, the ghost materialized. He was in his office, a corner suite on the top floor of the 20-story tower that was Bedrock and Apex's headquarters and their proudest achievement to date. He was reviewing a complex proposal with Anya, their heads bent together over a set of architectural renderings. The office was a testament to their shared aesthetic, minimalist, functional, beautiful, polished concrete floors, walls of glass, and a massive oak table that served as a communal workspace. The air smelled of fresh coffee and the clean, papery scent of blueprints. His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom, hesitant and confused. "Liam, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Her name is Sarah." Liam's head snapped up. He looked at Anya. Her expression was calm, her eyes steady on his. She knew the whole story, of course. There were no secrets between them. He felt a cold, heavy stillness settle over him. He had spent years building walls to protect himself from this exact moment. Now, he would see how strong they were. "Send her in," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. The glass door to his office hissed open. Sarah stood there, framed in the doorway. The years had not been kind. The vibrant, confident woman from the hotel bar was gone. This Sarah was thin, her face etched with fine lines of stress and disappointment. She was wearing clothes that had once been expensive but were now showing their age, a designer handbag scuffed at the corners. She looked around the expansive office, at the sweeping views of the city, at the quiet, confident woman standing beside him, and her eyes, when they finally met his, were a toxic cocktail of desperation, envy, and feigned remorse. "Liam," she breathed, taking a hesitant step into the room. She tried for a smile, a watery, pathetic thing. "You've done well for yourself." "Sarah?" he replied, his tone polite, neutral. He did not stand up. He did not offer her a seat. He was a mountain, and she was a loose stone at its base. She launched into the performance he had half expected. Her voice was thick with practiced victimhood. She spoke of Julian's betrayal, of her own naivety, of the terrible mistake she had made. She painted herself as a tragic figure, a woman led astray by glittering promises. Tears welled in her eyes, perfectly timed. It was a masterful piece of emotional manipulation, and 7 years ago it would have shattered him. Now it was just noise. He listened, his face an unreadable mask, his mind cold and clear. He saw every calculation, every fabricated emotion. He was no longer the man who could be swayed by her tears. He was a man who understood foundations, and hers was rotten to the core. Anya, sensing the conversation needed to be private, gave his shoulder a slight squeeze, a silent transfer of strength, and quietly excused herself, closing the glass door behind her, leaving him alone with the ghost of his past. "I have nothing, Liam," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere to go. I hoped you might find it in your heart to help me, for old time's sake." He looked at her, at the woman who had left him with a mountain of debt and a broken teenage girl, who had called his life's work dust. He thought of the sale of his father's Mustang, of the years of sleepless nights and relentless work, of the quiet, steady loyalty of Anya, of the woman Chloe had become. "There is no old times," he said, his voice as cold and hard as polished granite. "You demolished that structure yourself. There's nothing left to salvage." The mask of remorse on Sarah's face flickered, and for a second he saw the raw, ugly desperation beneath. Pity had failed. Her eyes narrowed, and the softness in her voice hardened into something sharp and brittle. The victim was gone. The blackmailer had taken her place. "Don't be so quick to dismiss me, Liam," she said, her tone turning venomous. "You seem to have forgotten a small, inconvenient detail. We are still married. In the eyes of the law, half of this," she gestured around the opulent office, at the city skyline beyond, "half of this entire empire you've built is mine." She stood there, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had him. She thought she had found a crack in his fortress, a legal loophole she could exploit to pry her way back into his life and his fortune. She mistook his silence for shock, his stillness for fear. She had always mistaken his quiet for weakness. It was a fatal miscalculation. Liam felt nothing, no anger, no panic, only a profound, weary sense of finality. This was the last piece of the old structure that needed to be demolished before the sight was truly clear. He had been preparing for this moment for years. "Let's go somewhere more private to discuss this," he said, his voice calm. He stood, his height and presence seeming to shrink the room around her. "There's a bar I know. We can talk there." She agreed, a flicker of confusion in her eyes at his lack of panic, but her confidence remained. She believed she held the winning hand. He chose the location with deliberate surgical precision, the bar at the Grand Atlas Hotel, the very place where his old life had ended. As they walked through the lobby, the same cloying scent of lilies and ozone filled the air. For Sarah, it was a return to the scene of her greatest triumph. For Liam, it was the site of a necessary demolition. They took a secluded booth in the corner. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with the murmur of quiet conversations and the clinking of ice in expensive liquor. Sarah ordered a ridiculously priced champagne cocktail, a gesture of her presumed victory. Liam ordered water. She laid out her terms, her voice dripping with entitlement. She didn't want a messy court battle, she claimed. A quiet settlement would be better for everyone. A significant portion of his company's stock, a generous alimony package that would keep her in the lifestyle she felt she deserved. She spoke of her half as if it were a foregone conclusion. Liam listened patiently, letting her spin her web of demands. He let her talk until she had exhausted herself, until she was sitting back against the plush leather, a self-satisfied smile on her face, waiting for his capitulation. When she was finally silent, he reached into the leather briefcase he had brought with him. He did not raise his voice. He did not show any anger. He simply began to dismantle her world piece by piece with the cold, hard tools of fact and preparation. He slid a single, crisp document across the polished table. "First," he said, his voice low and steady, "let's clear up a misconception. We are not married." Sarah stared at the paper. It was a finalized divorce decree. The date on it was from 5 years ago. "I filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment 6 months after you left," he explained calmly. "My lawyer sent the summonses to every address we could find for you and Mr. Croft. You were living a rather transient lifestyle. When you failed to respond, the court granted a default judgment. Our marriage was legally dissolved 5 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. You are not my wife. You have no legal claim to anything I have." The color drained from her face. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. I never received anything," she stammered. "That is not my concern," Liam said, his voice devoid of sympathy. He reached back into his briefcase. "Second, regarding the assets you believe you are entitled to." He laid out another file. This one was thicker. "When Marcus and I formed Bedrock and Apex, we had excellent legal counsel. The company was structured with a series of trusts and holding corporations. The vast majority of my personal net worth is tied to assets acquired after the date our divorce was finalized. Even if you had a claim, which you do not, you would be entitled to half of what I owned at the time of our legal separation. At that time, my net worth consisted of a 10-year-old truck, a mountain of shared debt which you left for me, and a checking account with a balance of $700. Your half would be $350. I'll write you a check." The legal counsel he mentioned, he did not add, was a brilliant young lawyer who knew the case intimately, his niece, Chloe. She had structured his financial fortress with the ferocity of a protective daughter, ensuring every stone was perfectly placed, every loophole sealed. Sarah was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The champagne cocktail sat untouched, its bubbles dying. She looked trapped, cornered. The hunter had become the prey. But Liam was not finished. He had one more tool, one final crushing weight to apply. He slid a third folder across the table. It was a thick, meticulously organized binder. "Finally," he said, his voice dropping to an almost gentle register, which was somehow more terrifying than rage, "let's talk about what is actually owed." He opened the binder. Inside were years of compiled records, credit card statements, bank records, receipts. "This is the joint debt you left me with," he said, tapping a summary page. "Credit cards, a car loan for the vehicle you took, store accounts, all maxed out. I paid them all off to protect my credit rating. The total was $42,112. He flipped a page. "This is a summary of the costs of raising and educating Chloe for the past 7 years. Housing, food, clothing, medical expenses, and her tuition at a top-tier law school. As her legal next of kin after her parents' passing, you were equally responsible for her welfare. Your half of that cost comes to $287,000. He turned another page. "I have had my accounting department calculate the accrued interest on both of these sums over the intervening years, compounded annually at a modest, legally defensible rate. The total you owe me, Sarah, is $394,000 $651.18. He closed the binder with a soft, final thud. "I don't need the money," he said, his eyes meeting hers. They were not angry. They were not triumphant. They were simply empty of her. "But it is a debt, and I am a man who believes in settling accounts. You came here today to present me with a bill. Instead, here is mine." Sarah stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. The entire foundation of her plan, her last desperate hope, had been systematically demolished in the span of 10 minutes. She was not his wife. She was not entitled to his fortune. She was his debtor. Liam leaned back in his seat, the leather creaking softly. He looked around the bar at the opulent decor, the well-dressed patrons. A sense of strange, circular completion washed over him. "It's ironic, isn't it?" he said, his voice almost conversational. "This place, this is where it all ended for me. Where I saw you with him. I never told you I was here that night. I just watched, and then I left." He paused, letting the weight of that confession settle in the space between them. "My company, Bedrock and Apex, recently acquired the portfolio of non-performing loans held by Julian Croft's primary lender. The Grand Atlas was one of those assets. We took it over last month. We begin a full renovation and rebranding on Monday." He gestured vaguely at the room around them. "You're sitting in my building, Sarah." He stood up, placing a few bills on the table to cover his water and her untouched champagne. "I've comped your room for the night, but checkout is at 11 tomorrow morning. The front desk will have a bill ready for your incidentals." He looked down at her one last time. She was a ruin, a collapsed structure of her own making. There was no pity in his gaze, only a vast, quiet distance. He had spent 7 years building a new life, a new empire, not of money and steel, but of loyalty, love, and self-respect. And in this final, quiet confrontation, he had demolished the last remnant of the old one. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her alone in the wreckage. The weight was gone. As Liam walked out of the Grand Atlas Hotel and into the crisp night air, he felt a lightness he had not experienced in 7 years. It was not the elation of victory or the satisfaction of revenge. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the feeling of a massive, long-carried burden being set down for the last time. The ghost that had haunted the blueprint of his life had been exorcised. The final demolition was complete, the site finally and irrevocably cleared. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew what he would have seen. A woman broken by her own choices, a relic of a past he no longer inhabited. His focus was forward. Anya was waiting for him, parked just down the street, the warm glow of the car's interior, a beacon in the darkness. She had insisted on being nearby, not to interfere, but to be there. A silent partner, a steady presence. He got into the passenger seat, the scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of sandalwood and paper, a comforting antidote to the hotel's artificial lilies. She didn't pepper him with questions. She just looked at him, her intelligent eyes searching his. "Is it done?" she asked softly. "It's done," he confirmed, the words feeling more real as he spoke them aloud. He reached across the console and took her hand, her fingers intertwined with his, a familiar, grounding connection. Her hand was not smooth and manicured like Sarah's had been. It was the hand of a fellow creator, strong and capable, with calluses of her own from her drafting tools and model making. It was the hand of a partner. "Where to now, boss?" she asked, a small, gentle smile playing on her lips. "The site," he said. She nodded, understanding immediately. She put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the Grand Atlas and the ghost within it to shrink in the rearview mirror. They drove in comfortable silence through the glittering city, a landscape he now knew not just as streets and avenues, but as a complex tapestry of foundations, load-bearing walls, and structural grids. He saw his work, their work, everywhere. The office tower where they had built their company, the residential complex where hundreds of families slept, the sleek new bridge arching over the river. He had built more than just a fortune. He had helped build a city. Anya parked at the base of their latest project, the one that had consumed them for the past 2 years, the Celestial Tower, a breathtaking 70-story skyscraper that would be the tallest residential building in the state. It was still a skeleton, a magnificent frame of steel and concrete reaching for the stars, wrapped in a skin of dark glass that reflected the moon. They bypassed the security guard who knew them both and took the clanking open-air construction elevator to the top. The ride up was a slow ascent through the layers of their creation. The wind howled around them, cold and clean, whipping their hair and clothes. It smelled of ozone and the vast emptiness of the night sky. Below, the city sprawled out, a breathtaking carpet of light and shadow, a circuit board of human connection. The elevator shuddered to a halt at the penthouse level. The floor was raw concrete, littered with tools and coils of wire. The walls were unfinished metal studs, and where the floor-to-ceiling windows would one day be, there were just gaping voids looking out into the abyss. Dust motes, stirred by their arrival, danced like tiny stars in the silver moonlight that flooded the space. They walked to the edge, standing in one of the future window frames, the wind pulling at them. They were on top of the world, on top of their world. This was his empire, not the steel and glass, not the number in his bank account. It was this, the ability to envision something and through grit and will and partnership, make it real. It was the quiet, unshakable woman standing beside him. It was the brilliant, loyal young lawyer he called his daughter. This was the structure he had built from the rubble. Anya leaned her head against his shoulder, her arm wrapping around his waist. They stood there for a long time, watching the distant, silent flow of headlights on the freeways below. 2 small figures against the vastness of the night. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice a near whisper against the wind. "It's going to be an incredible space." She looked around at the raw, unfinished interior, her architect's mind already seeing the finished walls, the polished floors, the life that would soon fill it. A small smile touched her lips. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." Liam looked away from the sprawling city and down at her. In the moonlight, her face was a study in strength and grace. She was his partner, his architect, his foundation. She was his home. The ache in his chest, the one he had carried for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it, was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid peace. He drew her closer, the rough fabric of his jacket against her cheek. The empire of revenge was a hollow thing. He had not bought a hotel to punish his ex-wife. He had bought it because it was a sound investment, a broken structure he knew how to fix. The fact that she was caught in its demolition was merely an incidental consequence, a footnote in a much larger story. His real victory wasn't her defeat, it was the life he was living now. "Let's go home," he said,